Fresh out of college, I was brimming with dreams and optimism, ready to carve out my place in the world. But life, as it often does, had other plans. The city I had moved to, full of promises and endless opportunities, turned out to be far harsher than I had imagined. I had been working a steady job, managing to pay my bills while saving a little on the side. It wasn't much, but it gave me a sense of security. Then, like a cruel joke, everything unraveled. My company downsized, and I was one of the employees let go. At first, I reassured myself that it was only temporary, that I'd find something soon. But as weeks stretched into months, my savings began to dwindle. Each morning I scrolled through job boards, sending out countless applications, clinging to the hope of a response. But the emails never came. The bills, however, never stopped. Rent became my biggest worry. I lived in a modest apartment, nothing extravagant, just a small, comfortable space to call my own. My landlord, Mr. Stevenson, was always polite during our brief interactions. He was in his mid-40s, carrying himself with a quiet authority that made him seem both approachable and reserved. When I missed my first rent payment, I was too ashamed to address it. I avoided him, convincing myself I could gather the money before he even noticed. But one evening as I returned home, I found him waiting by the stairs. My stomach twisted into knots. "Miss Harper," he greeted, his voice calm but firm. "I noticed you're behind on rent. Is everything okay?" I hesitated, a lump forming in my throat. I lost my job," I admitted, barely above a whisper. He nodded, his expression unreadable. "That's tough. I've seen tenants go through hard times before. Let me know if there's anything I can do to help." I thanked him quickly and hurried inside, hoping that would be the end of it. But a few days later, a letter appeared under my door, a formal reminder of my overdue rent. Panic set in. I had no family nearby and didn't want to burden my friends. A week later he knocked on my door again. This time, his demeanor felt different, less like a landlord and more like someone genuinely concerned. "I understand things are hard," he said, sitting at my tiny kitchen table. "I'm willing to work something out with you, so you don't lose your home." A heavy silence filled the room before he added, almost too casually, "Maybe we could arrange something different. Just until you get back on your feet." His words hung in the air, their meaning unmistakable. I wasn't naive. I understood exactly what he was implying. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw him out. But another part of me felt trapped. I couldn't afford to lose my apartment. I had nowhere else to go. "I'll think about it," I murmured, unable to meet his gaze. That night I barely slept. My thoughts spiraled in a whirlwind of fear and desperation. Was this really my only option? Could I bring myself to do something like this? I tried to silence the alarm bells ringing in my head, but I didn't realize how deep I was already sinking. The next day, I found myself sitting across from Mr. Stevenson at a small diner he had suggested. I told myself it was just a conversation, nothing more. But deep down I knew better. This was the beginning of something I wasn't entirely comfortable with. He smiled warmly, asking about my life, my dreams, my struggles. His tone was gentle, almost reassuring, as if he wanted to ease my anxieties. At first I kept my guard up, repeating to myself that this was temporary, that I could manage it until I found a way out. But as days turned into weeks, the dynamic began to shift. He was no longer just my landlord. He became a presence in my life, a companion of sorts. He'd drop by with groceries, invite me out for coffee, even help me look for jobs online. Slowly I let my walls down. He wasn't what I had initially assumed. One evening, over dinner, he opened up about his divorce. He spoke of the loneliness that followed, of the nights spent wondering if he'd ever find someone who truly cared. His voice carried a sadness that tugged at something inside me, and for a fleeting moment, I felt connected to him in a way I couldn't quite explain. I started to see him differently. He wasn't just the man who held the keys to my apartment. He was someone who had been hurt, just like me. His stories of heartbreak and resilience mirrored my own struggles. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't as one-sided as I had feared. We spent more time together, and with each interaction my doubts seemed to fade. He would offer sincere compliments. "You're so strong," he'd say. "Most people wouldn't have survived what you've been through." His words made me feel seen, valued, even admired. But there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when unease settled in my stomach. He asked about my friends, probing with subtle questions about who I spent time with or why I hadn't mentioned certain things to him. I dismissed it as harmless concern. Then came the gifts. A delicate necklace he claimed reminded him of me. A bouquet of flowers left at my door after a particularly rough day. They seemed sweet at first, thoughtful gestures of kindness. But as time passed, they began to feel overwhelming. I couldn't shake the feeling that his generosity came with invisible strings attached. Still, I silenced those doubts. I convinced myself this was normal, that this was what care and kindness looked like, even if it sometimes made me uneasy. After all, he was helping me when no one else could. And for the first time in months, I felt like someone actually cared enough to stay. I refused to believe there might be something more to his intentions. Until one quiet evening, everything fell apart. I had stepped out for a quick errand and returned earlier than expected. As I walked down the hallway toward my apartment, I heard voices coming from Mr. Stevenson's unit. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but something about the tone of his voice made me stop in my tracks. "Another one. Seriously, how do you keep pulling this off?" One voice laughed. His response sent a chill down my spine. "They're desperate, and I know exactly what to say to make them trust me. It's not hard when they're vulnerable." Froze. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. The words echoed in my mind, each syllable slicing deeper than the last. My stomach twisted as realization set in. They were talking about me. This wasn't kindness. It wasn't concern. It was manipulation, carefully wrapped in generosity and false support. I wanted to burst through the door, demand answers, scream at him for making me believe he cared. But my body refused to move. My legs felt like lead, my breathing shallow. Somehow, I managed to stumble back to my apartment, locking the door behind me. The walls seemed to close in, suffocating me. Every conversation, every warm smile, every reassuring word suddenly felt tainted. The next day, I tried to act normal, but the unease wouldn't leave me. I needed proof, something to confirm I wasn't overreacting, that I hadn't misunderstood. So I started digging. I combed through old reviews of the apartment complex, searching for anything that might back up what I had overheard. And there it was, a string of comments from former tenants. Some were vague, but others were chillingly direct. Clear pattern emerged. He had done this before, helping women in difficult situations, gaining their trust, making them feel like he was their only option, only to exploit their vulnerability. Felt sick. All those moments I thought were genuine, all the times I let my guard down, now felt like part of a calculated game. The person I had begun to trust wasn't who I thought he was. When I confronted him, I saw the shift instantly. The warmth, the charm, all of it vanished in an instant, replaced by a cold, defensive irritation. "You're overreacting," he scoffed, brushing off my accusations. "I've only ever tried to help you. If that's a crime, then so be it." But his words held no weight anymore. I saw through the act, saw him for what he truly was. I squared my shoulders, voice trembling but firm. "I'm not your pawn. Whatever game you're playing, it ends here." He tried to backtrack, his apologies empty and insincere, but I was done listening. I knew exactly what I had to do. That night, I packed my belongings and left. It wasn't easy. My savings were nearly gone, and I had no clear plan. But staying wasn't an option. Leaving wasn't just about escaping the apartment. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my independence. Close friend took me in without asking too many questions. Her quiet support was all I needed. Admitting what had happened wasn't easy. Not even to myself. I felt foolish. ashamed for trusting him, for missing the red flags. But I reminded myself that self-blame wouldn't change anything. It would only keep me trapped in the past. The first few days were the hardest. I'd wake up with a weight on my chest, replaying everything, trying to pinpoint the moment I let things go too far. How had I missed the manipulation hiding beneath his gestures? But as the days passed, I found my footing again. I poured my energy into job hunting, determined to rebuild my life on my own terms. Then one afternoon, while updating my resume, my phone rang. A company I had applied to weeks ago wanted to schedule an interview. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. It was a chance to start fresh, to move forward instead of dwelling on the mess I had left behind. I also started opening up to friends, to family, even to strangers in online support groups. I quickly realized how many others had been through similar experiences, each story carrying its own weight of pain and resilience. Sharing my experience was both cathartic and empowering. It reminded me that I wasn't alone, that what had happened to me didn't define my worth. Time passed, and with it came clarity. Desperation had blinded me, leading me to make choices I never thought I would. But it also taught me something invaluable: the importance of boundaries, the power of self-respect. No matter how difficult life gets, there is always another way, one that doesn't require sacrificing who you are. Small victories became my lifeline. Nailing that job interview, saving enough to rent a new place, waking up each morning feeling a little lighter. It wasn't a quick fix. It wasn't easy, but it was progress. And with each step forward, I reclaimed the control he had tried to take from me. Looking back, I see Mr. Stevenson for exactly what he was: a predator who preyed on vulnerability, disguising his intentions behind kindness. But I also see myself differently. I am not weak. I am not naive. I faced one of the toughest situations of my life and walked away stronger. Now I share my story, not out of bitterness, but to help others recognize the signs before it's too late. Life is unpredictable. Struggles are inevitable. But no one should ever feel like they have to sacrifice their self-worth just to survive. There is always another path, even if it takes time to find it.